The French. The goddamned French. That's really all one needs to say. The French are back to doing stupid shit. This weekend, the G7 summit is being held in France, and the participating countries are Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, the United States, and oddly the European Union, which is supposedly not a nation-state, but let's pretend that the goal of the EU is not to eradicate the national sovereignty of its members. One of the issues on the agenda for the G7 this year is the so-called Charter for an Open, Free, and Safe Internet, which is not Orwellian-sounding verbiage at all. The G7 press kit describes it thusly: Charter for an Open, Free, and Safe Internet. To fight hate speech, cyberbullying, and online terrorism, the French G7 presidency calls for the joint adoption of a charter for an open, free, and safe internet by governments, the private sector, and civil society. This charter aims to create a collective movement guaranteeing transparency and cooperation for the safe and positive use of the internet. It builds on the Christchurch call by widening the scope of commitments made by platforms, particularly in terms of taking down content, moderating, ensuring transparency, and supporting victims. The charter will be signed by major digital stakeholders in Paris on 23 August before being presented to the G7 states in Biarritz. Now, typically I like to read these things before I burn them to ashes, but I haven't read this charter because it's not been published anywhere. If this charter supposedly is an unqualified good, then the people on whom it is to be imposed, that's you internet users listening to this video by the way, then there should be no problem with making it available to all of us before anybody signs anything. This is shady French bullshit at work. First, they say, oh, we want the social media companies to sign the things before the governments do, which is suspicious in and of itself. Then once Facebook, Snapchat, Alphabet, etc. have already bent the knee, then the governments must sign, because the answer to people saying things on the internet is to effectively cut out their digital tongues than to refute what they say. But they say that the charter is supposed to build on the Christchurch call, which functionally creates a web of rules by which anything you say or write on the internet may be removed by the company hosting the content or by the government if it gets shuffled into the category of quote-unquote hate speech. Now, no one among the Eurocucks posturing about the elimination of hate speech can actually tell you what hate speech is, but they are adamant that you need to sign away your right to speak freely in order to combat it. And the practical effect of the so-called Christchurch call is that at least 7 people in New Zealand have been arrested, held without bail, and charged for mere possession of Brenton Tarrant's document, The Great Awakening. One person said that he had the right, under New Zealand's own Bill of Rights, to read The Great Awakening, to review it, and to make his own decision about it. That's it. That's what hate speech is, folks. You do not have the right to make your own inquiries, to read the source materials for yourself, or to reach your own conclusions. At least none that powerful people do not want you to ask, or read, or think. That's the goal of this whole exercise. It is to build a framework in which ideas may be suppressed quickly and quietly without any procedural protections for the person expressing the idea. And America didn't sign that Christchurch bullshit just like America won't sign this charter to make Facebook and Google the world internet police for a couple of reasons. Now, for the Eurotrash, for a bunch of people who claim to be so much smarter and more civilized than Americans, and despite destroying themselves twice through total war, they have a frightening inability to wrap their sophisticated European minds around the idea of freedom of speech, which necessarily entails the right to say things which might hurt other people's feelings from time to time, or that freedom of speech is preferable to the alternative, which is prior restraint on speech and censorship. The best answer to objectionable speech is counterspeech, not a stick to the head or a jail sentence. And maybe it's because Europeans are just so fundamentally servile in nature, or that they cannot conceive of a world in which they aren't being ruled by some all-powerful political entity, whether that entity is the king or parliament or the Central Committee of the Revolutionary Workers' Party, or that any European with a taste for liberty is an exception rather than a rule. In fact, hate speech is a concept wholly at odds with the American principle of freedom of speech. Now, the Supreme Court has routinely struck down soft language censorship regimes of quote-unquote hate speech for vagueness and overbreath, starting in 1992 with RAV versus City of St. Paul, which struck down a hate speech municipal ordinance on the grounds that cross-burning is protected expression under the First Amendment, just like flag burning, or bra burning, or effigy burning, or any other expressive acts of symbolic destruction. The court most recently reaffirmed that the nebulous concept of hate speech is not an exception to the First Amendment in the 2017 case of Mattal v. Tam, because some asshole at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office tried to block the Slants from trademarking their band's name. They rose up in offense and on behalf of Asians everywhere, despite the fact that Simon Tam was an Asian himself, and that multiple Asians stated that they were not, in fact, offended by the name. And the Supreme Court slapped this down in a 9-0 decision. Now, when conservative justices and progressive justices can come together, join arms as brothers and sisters in adjudication to tell you that hate speech laws are fucking stupid and blatant violations of the First Amendment, then maybe, just maybe, you should reassess the entire idea of hate speech. But if the First Amendment and freedom of speech just aren't enough to tickle your pickle and get you to full mast at the thought of all this freedom that we enjoy here in America, try the Supremacy Clause on for size. In 1957, the Supreme Court case Reed v. Covert explicitly states that rights protected by the Constitution may not be abridged by treaties or executive agreements or international pledges or any other globalist chicanery. The Constitution, within the confines of the United States, is the supreme law of the land. Full fucking stop. But that brings us to Facebook, Google, and whatever other social media platforms are in existence. I don't know. You have some asshole journo propagandists who go, herpity derpity derp, it's only censorship when the government does it. Therefore, Facebook, Twitter, and Google deplatforming or delisting or suppressing you is perfectly okay. Herpity derp. Yeah, okay, you dumb fuck. It's funny that progressives get under a full moon and transform into full-on Ayn Rand libertarians because they think that if Facebook and Google suppress enough people, it will surely spell the end of Donald Trump. Said progressives are fucking retarded because the kind of person who votes for Orange Man Bad is usually the kind of person who thinks that the corporate media, and that includes Fox News, is full of shit. But progressives need to believe in, desperately, the power of propaganda and cultural determinism, and that all human faculties for reason and self-interest may be overcome by sufficient volumes of op-eds and listicles and sob stories. The people who loudly proclaim to be educated and on the right side of history forget that the Russians eventually got bored of Soviet propaganda and went looking for the illegal American samizdat, the American books, the records, the films. They wanted to be entertained rather than lectured to. Or if they had to be lectured to, they wanted to at least be entertained while they were being lectured to. Now, Facebook has no interest in bucking the EU's blatantly oppressive bullshit because their business model is selling human eyeballs to advertisers, and it doesn't matter if those eyeballs are American, Eurotrash, African, Asian, whatever. So they will continue to try to play both sides until they lose enough money to European stupidity that they finally just block access to Europe. And just a reminder that Germany fined Facebook and Google $56 million in 2018 for not removing so-called hate speech fast enough, or that France is preparing to pass a similar law in the very near future. So, I suppose I'll do my duty as a proud American citizen when confronted by foreigners who demand that I surrender my inherent and natural rights in the name of their tyrannical utopian delusions. Go jump out of a tree, you fucking cheese-eating surrender monkeys.